The situation in the outer planets is clearly not what it appears to be. The inexplicable destruction of the Canterbury after being lured in dovetails with Miller's discovery that Julie Mao's father had known something bad was going to happen out there, even if he wasn't specific. Because of the way the story is presented, we know what the inner planets are thinking based upon how they react in front of our two viewpoint characters. And so far, the Martians' behavior doesn't seem to match up with that pointless act. When the survivors of the Canterbury are brought aboard the Donnager, under the command of Captain Yao, they're placed in a relatively comfortable set of quarters together and told only to remain inside, that the guards are there for their protection, but they're not going to tolerate any shenanigans. All of it is really very reasonable. Even when Holden is interrogated, the Martian handling it is merely asking questions. There's no implication that Holden is going to be tortured or executed if he doesn't cooperate. But what is most convincing is when the 6 ships that Holden and his people had noticed before reaching the Donnager continue to close in. The initial presumption is that they're belters come to ensure the Martians take good care of the survivors of the Canterbury. But that quickly is turned upside down as the ships and the Donnager eventually begin fighting, and the Donnager doesn't vaporize them in seconds like they should. The fight gets in so close that the warship gets to fire its unguided weapons. At this range, they can't miss. Neither, unfortunately, can the enemy, and one of the rounds from the enemy's railguns passes through the Canterbury's quarters, removing the head of one of the 5 and forcing the others to improvise a seal before they all suffocate. The whole ship is in rough shape. In fact, the Martian Marines give them suits and take the 4 survivors, Holden, the pilot Alex, the grease monkey Earther Amos, and the brilliant new XO Naomi, to one of their ships because the Donnager is likely going down. Boarders have already arrived and are so numerous that Amos suffers a compound fracture, and the only surviving Marine is killed by the G-force of their escape, an escape that he ordered them to make. If Mars had been behind the Canterbury, it doesn't seem likely that they'd die trying to save the 4 people who managed to escape that destruction. Unsure what to do, the 4 survivors contact Fred Johnson, who arranges for them to change their transponder, normally close to impossible, in order to avoid any trouble and to come to Tycho Station. As we learn, while the fusion drive opened the outer system for colonization, Tycho was what made that happen. From setting up the spin to give pseudogravity to places like Ceres. Keep in mind that Ceres isn't a small rock, it's a dwarf planet with a diameter about 1/4 that of the Moon. They were even contracted to build flying cities over Venus, scrapped because of dispute rights. Tycho basically was the place that you went to build the impossible. It is, therefore, appropriate that this is where Fred Johnson now works, seeking to end the exploitation of the outer planets in a way that won't end with nobody alive to appreciate their freedom. In the more physical sense, they are building the Nauvoo, a big generation ship commissioned by the Mormons to take them out of the solar system to begin again on a world over a distant star. This combination thus makes Fred Johnson uniquely qualified to handle the issues, as well as the fact that he's an Earth-born veteran who openly supports the Outer Planets Alliance. Someone who runs Tycho has to be capable of dreaming big, and of being a thorough realist. When the quartet arrives, he explains the reality of the situation. First, in any war, the Belt is not going to be capable of standing up to the fleets of Mars. They're well armed, but nowhere near that well armed. That is precisely why the OPA wasn't behind the attack on the Donnager. They could destroy it, sure, but not in that way. It'd be a whole lot of suicidal pilots with nukes that would take out a big warship, not overpowering and boarding until the captain is forced to self-destruct. So the OPA can't stand up to the Martian fleet, and likewise, it can't very well defend stations throughout the outer solar system. Mars can easily take out any or all of them if they wish to. But at the same time, Mars knows that living on a planet has its own downside. And down is especially relevant. The gravity of a planet means it's easy for belchers to strap chemical rockets onto small asteroids and fire them at the red planet. And they don't even have to be well aimed. And the Martians would have no one to spot every single last one before they arrived. That's why the Belt can't really fight for their freedom, because they have no means to win. All they have is the means to ensure the rest of the human race loses just as much as they do. But that doesn't mean that war isn't happening. After the Donnager was destroyed, the Martians destroyed a ship with no transponder. Turned out to be a private Belter ship that had turned off the transponder because the bank wanted to repossess it. 6 families were killed in that. The Belt was thus further outraged, and so some hotheads began attacking Martian ships. A few Martian ships get banged up and their people die, so the Martians are prepared to start firing first now. So some nutjob tries setting off a bomb to destroy a Martian dome, thus further escalating things. The Martian leadership knows it can't win a war either, but it can't do nothing in the face of what's happening. At the street level, Miller is discovering the same thing. His investigation into the Julie Mao case eventually leads to a visit by the local head of the OPA, Anderson Dawes. Julie is one of theirs, so he'd like Holden to back off and let him investigate her disappearance. He'll share what he learns in return for that. Miller doubts Dawes is a better detective than him, but after a little work he tells Miller that the riot gear was taken by an officer Trigalaski for Special Unit Service 23, neither of which exists, and were really taken off the station by a group presumably related to organized crime. He also tells Miller that Julie was on the scopuli. Miller is left to think about what he's doing, and funnily enough, he and Fred Johnson seem to, in a sense, be on the same page. Miller is thinking of all the things he should be doing as a police officer on Ceres to protect people, and considers that the single greatest threat to everyone on the station is the possibility of war between the Belt and Mars. Thus, if he wants to protect people, solving the case related to that is the best thing that he can be doing. And Fred Johnson is of the view that, while war is impossible, peace is likewise impossible. There's been too much death to just get everyone to calm down and play nice. He believes the only solution is a trial. That can resolve matters without further violence. In other words, if you combine Miller and Johnson's views, then these events aren't really about war after all. This is about something that needs to be investigated and brought into the light to ensure justice for the victims of what happened. What we have here is a literal crime against humanity, one that must be investigated by a detective and prosecuted by a court. So in that aspect, Leviathan Wakes is a crime novel. Of course, the intended outcome couldn't be more different for the two men. Johnson has a specific end in mind, trying to turn this into a chance to broker a treaty to end the exploitation of Belters. Miller, on the other hand, is directionless. He's not committed to his job, it's just a job, but the Julie Mao case is something more to him. With everything he learns, he only admires her strength more, and makes a comment without really thinking that she's a pretty girl. Throughout the early parts of the book, Miller would sometimes see Candace, his ex-wife, on hand to make a comment on Miller or on the situation he's in. She fades over time, and eventually Miller begins picturing Julie in the same kind of role, even though he never met her. Even though he's a 30-year vet, nearly 50 years old, and never met her, he's still falling for her. He's determined to find her, despite learning that the captain, who had brushed off his revelation about Julie's father's warning, is in bed with the OPA. Given her naked racism towards Havelock and uncompromising belief that Martians blew up the Canterbury to justify taking over the Belt, this is not surprising. But Dawes, he's smarter than that, and points out Miller needs to stop wasting his time. As Dawes puts it, you can't even find out what happened to your own riot gear. It's the wake-up call on what a joke Miller is, a once great cop that now is a nobody, assigned to people who are unwanted or are being punished. Muss, his new partner, refused the advances of her superior. Miller is fired the moment word comes in that Earth, bending to Martian pressure, is withdrawing its protection from the Belt, meaning that he's considered too unreliable for a time that's so uncertain. And it is. As a neutral party, Earth was the best chance to resolve the conflict peacefully. So for Miller, the case of Julie is a personal pursuit, have to keep him busy, have to give his life some kind of meaning. That investigation is based right now on the revelation that the scopuli was OPA, and that Dawes claimed they had Holden. He deduces the events that happened and determines the right ship, the Martian corvette Tachi, a gunship with a proper fusion drive, now listed as a gas hauler named Rocinante. Miller notes that a gas hauler wouldn't make a trip between two gas-receiving ports, and he discovers the significance of the name. Not only does it literally mean a workhorse no more, fitting for Holden's crew that have decided to be independent contractors, but it was also the name of Don Quixote's horse, and that fits the pie-in-the-sky idealism that Miller sees in Holden's attitude. Thanks to info from Havelock, who left to take a job with Protogen, he realizes that he needs to go to the station on Eros. That is indeed where the Rocinante, or Rosie, is going, in disguise as a gas hauler and looking into a problem for Fred Johnson. A man named Lionel Polanski has checked in there. Problem is, Polanski doesn't exist. He's the fictitious owner of the Scopuli, hence Johnson's concern. As you can see, Miller and Holden are finally on a collision course, and while their circumstances couldn't be more different, that act is significant. Holden has been on a long string of happenstance. It was chance that his ship was the one lured to the Scopuli. It was chance that Holden was on that crew. Chance that he would be a pawn in the games of Mars, Fred Johnson, and whoever else is involved. Chance that he wasn't killed like their medic during battle, or killed escaping to the Tachi. Heading to Johnson was a desperate need to right themselves after what had happened, especially because without him, they were in a ship whose transponder they couldn't turn on, so that was asking for trouble. Heading to Eros now is thus the first time that Holden and his team have a chance to make a decision on their own terms. Miller, unlike Holden, was a pawn in no one's game, other than being a human trash can that someone can drop things into they want lost. His investigations just led to one person after another obstructing him, even to the point of rubbing it in his face. His decision, after being fired, to follow a lead to Eros is likewise, then, a decision made on his own terms, not within the confines of orders from above. So Eros is the point where both men are going to finally take more active control of the situation rather than being used by someone else. Even if Holden is going on behalf of Johnson, it's because their goals are in alignment on the job. In the next part, we'll see how these two men size each other up.